Welcome to another lecture in the online series of Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, ASHA, and Ganga Jamuni Heritage. In the days gone by, more and more things are opening up, and the COVID cases are progressively declining. Hope we soon will be living normal offline lives where we would be meeting each other and not meeting virtually. Today, we have a very remarkable person with us, Dr. Rima Hooja, who is actively involved in maintaining our tangible heritage of the past. An archaeologist, historian, and writer, Dr. Rima Hooja has a PhD from Cambridge University. She is currently director of the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh Second Museum at Jaipur. She is also director of the famous Jaigarh Fort, a trustee of Maharaja Ganga Singh Ji Trust, Bikaner. She is also a managing trustee, Jaipur Virasat Foundation, a visiting faculty of School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, adjunct faculty of Ahmedabad University, as well as vice president of ICMOS India. Dr. Hooja is also a former member of India's National Monuments Authority, as well as a member of the Kaaba, the Central Advisory Board of Archaeology of Government of India. She is a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland and a distinguished international academician of Minnesota University at US. He has been associate professor at Kota Open University, visiting fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, director of Minnesota University's MSID India program, faculty director of New York State Independent College Consortium for Study in India program, as well as vice president COMOS India. She has held various academic posts and serves on several governing boards, committees, and councils. She has published extensively, and her books include Ahar, Culture and Beyond, published by Oxford in 1988, Prince, Patriot and Parliamentarian, published in 1997, Environmental Degradation in 1992, Crusader for Self-Rule, 1999, History of Rajasthan, 2006, Mandan's Devata Murti Prakaranam in 1998, Constructing Rajputana, which she co-edited 2009. Another of her co-edited works is Conserving Fortified Heritage, which was published in 2016. She has also written a number of other works, for example, Rajasthani Stories Retold in 2017, Rajasthan, a concise history. The next year in 2018, a very popular book, Forts of Maharashtra, which she co edited in 2021, and Maharana Pratap, the Invincible Warrior, in 2018. She has around 75 papers and articles to her credit. She does not only care about museums and academics, she runs the Animal Care Trust and she personally houses about 60 cats. Today, she will be speaking to us on past through the prism of preserved artifacts, the Rajputs, the Mughals, and their shared culture and technological experiences. Possibly holding a position in a number of very well known museums, she is quite well placed to talk about the conserved heritage which are there in the museum and which throw much light on the Rajput Mughal relations as well as our shared past. I take the honor of inviting her and requesting her to place her views as one of those who is holding such treasures for this country. Over to you, Dr. Hooja.
Thank you so much, Professor Saab. Thank you for those words. I am still at the stage, or maybe I have got to the stage where I get embarrassed with all the introduction. But what is sobering is if you hear a strange noise, it'll be one of the 60 cats. So don't just think I'm interrupting the show. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. And I've been looking at some of the earlier presentations. So I'm looking forward to the kind of questions you might ask me. I have, of course, got a little glimpse of our museum ready for you also, some things to share with you. Should also like to say at this stage that I think I'm a reluctant museologist. I don't think I thought I would be a museum person, which is a strange thing for someone who's a lapsed archaeologist to say. Because if I can look at the past that far back, then what's wrong with looking at artifacts? Nothing. It hadn't come my way in quite the same manner as it has in the last few years, where I have been actively working in a museum, including through the COVID period. And it is a museum that has literally treasures. A new book has come out, it is being launched this month, which is going to cover the masterpieces of the museum. So, when we talk about what is being preserved, maybe we can have my first or second slide also at some point. What we have in Jaipur, in the museum there, which is open for everyone to see, is really part of this Sanji Virasat. It is something that has developed out of exchanges over the centuries between humans who happen to live in India. So that comes through. You will see some of those items on display. And in particular, I mean, I was thinking to myself, how do I structure this as someone who is not really doing that much serious reading and writing as I would love to? I'm doing much more of fluff nowadays. This is not one of those pieces. And realized that if I look at not just the objects in the museum, but also the building of our museum, we are lucky that the building itself is something worth looking at. And then the longer tradition of the 36 Karkhanas that Jaipur is famous for, which again is a part of this Sanji Virasat, which comes out of the interaction of the Rajputs and the Mughals. which carries on into the British period. In fact, one of the images is going to be of that. So whenever we can have the PPT display, then maybe we can have that. Until that point, you and I can just talk anyway. So, as I said, pleasure to be here. And should we go for the first of the images?
You'll have to give me a minute. For some reason, the slides are not working. I'm working on them.
Right.
Just give me a bit,
That's
please.
okay. We have enough to talk about till then. We had a brief glimpse of the first of them. So I think one of the issues that I do want to talk about, I'm not going, maybe in the question answer, we can have some of that, into the broader aspect of the nature of relationship between the Rajputs, particularly the Kachwahas, particularly this whole emotive thing of the Jaipur or the Amer ones being in closer contact. Because when you look at history, almost everyone is in close contact at some point or the other. And having done this book on Pratap, I've ended it on the note of how Shehzada Khurram, on his way to becoming Badshah, has lived in Mewar for a while, and he becomes the Pagdi Badal Bhai of the then ruler of Maharana Karan Singh, the then ruler of Mewar. And the irony there is that these two are the grandsons of two former antagonists. And yet, in the way of life, things happen to us, we react to them as human beings. And so when Khurram needs shelter, he goes to Mewar, where he's already had interaction with Karan Singh. He gets his shelter. Where he stayed, that place is a site worth visiting. But that's taking me away from the area I'm talking about myself. So let's come back to the City Palace Museum, which was set up initially. We can go on to the second of these, please, where I've got a few points that I will be talking on. But this museum was set up in 1959 originally by the then Maharaja of uh, Jaipur, erstwhile Jaipur state. He had ceased to be the Maharaja, though the titles had not gone, but he was still Raj Pramukh, or the governor of New Rajasthan, and was, I think, far seeing enough, far sighted enough to realize that things belong to the nation and should be seen by the nation. So a museum was set up. It is now named after him. It is the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh Second Museum. But our story goes back a little further. So, once upon a time, which is what historians do not say, but storytellers do, and being someone who's also telling stories, once upon a time there was a kingdom called Dhoondhar, which had a couple of earlier capitals, but then eventually had a capital at Amer. And Amer architecture is something that then gets transferred when Savai Jai Singh decides to make a new city, and this is 1727 we are talking about. So he brings with him that entire inheritance or tradition of the state he's ruler of, Dhoondhar, which is at Amer, and brings it to the new capital, which he names after himself as Jaipur. And so not just the architecture, but the artifacts and the system of the 36 karkhanas, the other ateliers, the ways of making swords, all of that comes over. This is also still a time where the interaction is taking place. So it's not just that you have contacts at X point in time and nothing more. Relationships are ever fluid and ever evolving, and we find that in the new city of Jaipur itself. If we are able to go on to the next image, fine. If we are not, we just carry on. I would suggest we ignore number 1, 2, and maybe even 3 and go on to the map of Jaipur, which is again part of this. Thank you. Can we make that a little larger? I can maybe go slow enough, then we can go one at a time instead of a present screen. So what you're looking at is, sorry, that's one of the cats. What you're looking at is a built row of lines and things, which is old Jaipur. To its north lay Amer, not very far. This is a period where there is more peace. This is a period where people can think again of getting off the hilltops and thinking of double protection and have a notional protection. So the old walled city of Jaipur, which, by the way, as you all know now, is also a World Heritage Site as of 2019. The wall we have there, the Parkota as they call it, is a notional one. It is high, of course, it is high, but it's not one of those solid things of 20 or 9 feet that top ka gola does not go through kind of things. It is a wall which provides protection, but it's not meant to be providing as much protection as was needed in the past. This larger map shows you some blue squiggles in it. The very symmetrical ones are the Tal Katora, again a part of it, but the other ones, a bit like a whale or a fish shaped, is what became the Jal Mahal Palace, behind which Man Singh had made a dam in his period. So basically, the new Jaipur is in the plain. It is an area that is not needing to be protected in quite the same way. And it is a place where all kinds of art, objects, artifacts, everything could have a full play. Maybe we can quickly take the next couple of slides if we can move fast enough with them, and then save some more time to talk. So the next is really a close-up of the city of Jaipur, which again, part of the reason this comes about, and here is our other link, constant link with the Mughals, the astronomy tables, the various tables that were being used. Jai Singh, Sawai Jai Singh second, as the ruler of Dhoondhar, was interested in mathematics and astronomy, which is an understatement considering he designed and built 5 of the Jantar Mantars of India at that time. The Delhi one still stands. So if you are near Delhi, please see that. The one at Ujjain is kind of notionally there. Mathura was destroyed. The one at Banaras is still there in Man Mandir. And of course, Jaipur is there. If I've left out something, it'll come back to me, whichever one I've left out. But with his interest in mathematics, he was also interested in town planning, which comes through in his buildings. And it comes through in the Jaipur that he made, and again in the images that he got. Shagufta, if the images are not going to move, don't worry so much. Just move to whichever of them you can, and Professor Razavi and I can have a chat as we go along and bring in elements and just bring in the objects as and when we can. Shall I try some form of screen sharing? Will that not work?
Please do that. I mean, try to do on your end, because there's something which is not right on the part of Shagufta. The slides are not moving.
It's probably me. I think I'm a bit of a jinx where it comes with screen sharing is easier. Blah blah. Let's see what I am going to be sharing. So I still, as you mentioned, sir, I still take these classes, and every now and then my students have to say to me, "Ma'am, do you want to do X?" So let's try again. Screen share, screen slides. No, I have no slides. Computer. Sorry, I'm talking aloud. PowerPoint and PDF. Okay. All right. We're trying again. If something does happen.
So far, nothing has happened.
So far, nothing has happened. All right. So far, nothing has happened. This is called the best laid plans of someone inefficient like me. We will go back to system audio. All right. Any tips
Nothing.
from your end, Shagufta?
I think for the moment, while I fix this, I'm just converting them to Google Slides. I think you can have a conversation until
All
then.
right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
Uh, well, in that case, Dr. Hooja,
Ji, sir.
uh, may I suggest that for the audience, I mean, the young students who are joining in, can we first of all talk about the Kachwahas and their relationship with the type of relationship which they had with the Mughals, uh, uh, and how this Amir and I mean, the palaces out there came into existence. Let's start from there, and then you carry forward with what you have to say.
Definitely, definitely, and that's a question I would dearly love to share. The answer with. So, like with a lot of dynasties, at some point genealogies come up which trace them to hundreds of years before. But what we do know from historical facts is roughly in the 10th century or thereabouts, uh, there is movement possibly from the Gwalior end, because that they currently the Kachwahas, or the dynasty that was ruling the Dhoondhar kingdom with its capital at Amer, moved, they say, in that direction. And there is an earlier period where there is conflict with the local inhabitants of the land, who are today classified under the schedule of the constitution as the Minas, the scheduled tribes. But in their time, of course, they were not using these terms. These were just another group that was already in physical possession, but not just physical possession. They were the masters of the land. There were lots of other communities. So the interaction initially is with the Minas. Kingdom gets established, a clan deity is established, and a little capital is set up at Amer. Around that time, with more interactions, they are kind of safe in a secluded valley. The uh, kingdom expands a little more. By the time we have the reign of Emperor Humayun, the Kachwahas are finding themselves pressured by the groups around them. So you have Mewat on one side, and we have the rest of the well, Rajputana, to use a better term. But if you look at the map of Rajasthan, which is roughly the size of and shape of France today, they are a relatively smaller kingdom in a large pool of people around them. And Mirza Sharfuddin, so here we are linking it up for those who are familiar with Mughal history with the period of Akbar, is one of the people who's sometimes attacking, sometimes taking revenue, sometimes leaving the Kachwahas alone. And by this time, you find that Akbar has also got over that initial phase of being, the protege, listening to Behram Khan. He's coming into his own. He's finding his wings, so to speak, and he's finding them in quite a remarkable way. And then during the time, so everybody needs everyone. If I was to just boil it down, um, he realizes that he needs support. This is the he here is Akbar. The rulers of Amer have been changing rapidly, as in, one nephew gets bumped off by another uncle, that kind of thing. So they're going through a phase of uncertainty themselves. And at the time that Akbar decides on one of his pilgrimages, and he is going to Ajmer Sharif, the then ruler Bharmal sends his brother to wait on him, on Akbar. And from there comes a longer relationship of close cooperation, family relations with the Mughal dynasty and the Kachwahas. The Kachwahas have always been a strong fighting force. In today's history, people don't really realize what it means. But the flag of Jaipur today, of the Dhoondhar state, of originally it was a white flag with a Kachnar tree on it or a Kachnar branch on it, which, by the way, also is the reason that their coins were known as Jhad Shahi in the 19th century. Jhad bana hua hai uspe. But the more dramatic flag they have, which still flies, and if when you visit, as you said, sir, COVID is going to be over, is we hope over, and we can have more physical meetings and physical visits to museums, you will see the present flag of erstwhile Jaipur state, which has 5 colors on it. Now, that colors were the flags, the parcham, that were won when Man Singh the first went to Afghanistan as a general of the Mughal army. And the Afghans were not easy to tame, that we knew. Akbar's half brother, Mirza Hakim, was there. Well, he was not easy to tame, but particularly, the Roshan Zais, Yusuf Zais. Man Singh and Man Singh's forces. So the Rajput rulers would go with their clan people, whoever went with them, which also meant that people from the villages, with the way the feudal system worked, the ruler, the court, the feudal chiefs, their people from their villages, so the local man who's going to be shoeing the horses is there. And they were apparently quite a terrible force in the Afghanistan area, because they managed to win victories for the empire, and they managed to defeat some of the troops, some of the tribes. And eventually, of course, there was a darkhast in the Mughal court, and they said, please call Man Singh back, send him somewhere else. He was sent off. He was sent off to Bengal, where he also brought a lot to Jaipur, to not Jaipur, to Amer and Dhoondhar in cultural terms, but he gave a lot in cultural terms. But the flag of Jaipur comes from the parchams, or the flags, or the pennants of the defeated tribes that were brought into the Mughal Empire during the time of Man Singh. We also have Shirmal in Jaipur. As it's there in so many parts of the country. You'll say, what's so special? Nothing so special, except that is a direct link to the Pathans who came back with the army of the Kachwahas, as I said, a fighting force of great renown in those days, and settled in Amer because they were invited to. The Topchis also came. This is a time where they probably hid away the fact that they had learned to make cannons. And Man Singh and his father, we always talk of Man Singh before we talk of his father, who was the Maharaja when Man Singh was still Kunwar, the prince. But in time, of course, Man Singh was also the ruler. But they set up a small foundry, cannon foundry. So the urban legend goes, or so the historical story goes, at Jaigarh. And that later on, of course, is used much more. So the Kachwahas are
hold on for a moment,
Sir. Yes, Dr. Razavi.
This story which you have so far narrated about the rulers of Amer, the Kachwahas, and their relationship with the Mughals, the early part of the story, as narrated by you, is that the first contact between the Kachwahas and Mughals under Akbar took place under Bharamal, who was the ruler of the Kachwahas, who had overthrown the Miras and taken up the charge of Amer.
His ancestors had done that.
Achha,
his ancestors 500 years before.
Right.
So
right.
the Kachwahas were well established, but
Right.
this was the time where the contact takes place.
You have also explained that the particular flag, which still flies on the City Palace Museum, which is told to us, the general public, that this is the Kachwaha flag, is actually a flag which became the flag of the Kachwahas after they won a war on behalf of the Mughals in Afghanistan.
So the story is Correct,
Right.
correct, Dr. Razavi. That when Man Singh had the defeated flags, and he presents them to Akbar, who always referred to Man Singh as a Farzand, his son, except when he was angry with him, which happened, which is on record. He said, "Court mein aana teen mahine band kar diya." Uh, and Akbar said, "You have won the victory, so the flag is yours." So the commander in chief got that composite flag. So this is just one of the ways in which the relationship is obvious and established for us. But a lot of the artifacts that were handed down also come from this period of contact. So the Jaipur Museum has been famous for a long time, and indeed, even the government museum, for carpets which go back to this period of close contact with the Mughals. Because a lot of daris have been made in the 19th century, cotton daris, in Jaipur, in other former princely states of Rajputana, but using silk or wool, even pashmina wool, was something that was, of course, being done by the Mughals. So the tents always would have these elaborate floor coverings, and that tradition is there in Jaipur. One of the pieces we have, which I would not have displayed even if I had been able to show the image, I don't have it in my slide because it's in on display, so you have to come and see it, is a 16th century pashmina rug carpet. There are only apparently two of the sort, which has got this deep red maroon color, which one of the carpet experts from the I think Rosemary Krill said that it is from the lacquer. How they extract it is not my area, but and they think it was made probably in Lahore. Initially, they said Lahore or Kashmir, but they don't. They think it was Lahore more. So, but not just that. There were a lot of fitted carpets that come into Amer. That was again part of this whole tradition of interaction. Not just that, some of the terms which have carried on. So the Farash Khana was where the tents were stored well into the time that the Jaipur state merged with New India. Roshan Chowki, where all the lamps and things were kept. Other artifacts that were being made then become part of something that comes in this same Mansingh the first time, which is the karkhanas that they set up. Now, the karkhana for an average Indian today is probably something one associates maybe with, the car is broken down and there's a karkhana for that. Here it is much more in the sense of the atelier. So for art historians, the school of Jaipur painting is part of the relevant karkhana. Much later, once photography comes, we also have a tasveer khana or a photo khana, even that. But this tradition, Gunijan khana. Now here you're using people who are well versed in the arts, in singing, in performances, court performances, as the Gunijans. So that again is one of the traditions which came through, which has objects that we are displaying. The Sile Khana was making weapons. We have a wonderful display of weapons, not just because they are weapons of war, but because of the karigari on them, the workmanship on these items, gold work on metal, the hilts of swords covered up, a archer's ring for the thumb protection made of walrus ivory. Things I wouldn't have imagined walrus ivory in the middle of the desert, but it is there through some form of trade. So a lot of these things came in at this point in Mansingh's time, but they developed much more once Jai Singh, who is Mansingh's great grandson, establishes. So we move from the 16th to the 18th century almost for the Jaipur Karkhana to develop and be something that is there. I did mention about Jaipur being a World Heritage Site now. It's also a creative city, creative city, because of the crafts that it has. Not singular, not a craft, but many crafts. And that too, if you think of it, was in part because the rulers of the Dhoondhar state of Jaipur Amer invited artisans to settle, including people famous for Meenakari work from Lahore. And there's a Sikh family that has been in Rajasthan since that period, 500 years, 400 years. They came in Jahangir's time, actually, not Akbar's. But that skill is still there in the street. So a lot of the crafts that are being practiced today, modern day, you go shopping, you can buy something made of bangles made of and lacquer and things, are part and parcel of this longer tradition of a Chhattis Karkhana. So much so that I was saying at one point that even polo, which has been revived to a great extent, and Jaipur is now considered the heart of Indian polo land, is something that is kind of the forerunner is all the tabelas, or actually the word was the atish, in the court of Jaipur. So it's not just art objects, it's not just the preserved artifacts, it's also the preserved memories, the preserved traditions, cultural traditions, which are coming through.
Well, Dr. Hooja, I mean, let us discuss at least three of those things which you mentioned just now. You mentioned the carpet weaving industry which had developed there. And of course, one of the major parts of the museum at Jaipur City Palace Museum is your hall where the products from the Farrash Khana are depicted. I mean, beautiful carpet, one of which you mentioned just now. You also mentioned, Tasveer Khana, the place where these paintings were being produced, right? And naturally, one of the best galleries of City Palace Museum is the one devoted to the Rajput painting, so-called Rajput
Yes,
painting,
yes,
right?
yes.
And then, of course, another very important part of the museum which you hold is the Sileh Khana, the arms and armaments, the armory and things related with that. While we were waiting for the slides, you also had mentioned about a gun foundry, which is not in the City Palace Museum but at Jagar Fort, right?
G.
So
Right,
let us first of all discuss these three things. Then we will go to the other aspects.
right.
Now,
Now,
for example, Dr. Hooja, I was fortunate enough to go to Iran a few years back before the pandemic. And in Iran, in Tehran, I was able to visit a museum which is dedicated to the carpets in central Tehran itself. Most of the carpets naturally are from 18th century, 19th century, which are on display in Iran. But we were also told and shown a few pieces which belong to the Mughal period, which are on display in the Tehran Museum. As far as my understanding of the carpet weaving industry during the 17th century, because we are talking about late 16th, 17th centuries, as far as that period goes, I think much before the Rajputs developed this art of carpet weaving, that was an art which was developed in Central Asia amongst the Turks, among the Persians. And this art, to a large extent, was also being followed by the Mughals. I mean, the Mughals also had, very large Farrash Khanas with them. The Persian carpets of the Mughals are well known. So, what I would like to know from you at this particular moment is that among the artifacts which belong to this category of the Faraj Khana, which are there in the City Palace Museum, how many of them can be traced back to Central Asia, Persia, or to Mughal craftsmanship, and how many of them actually were those who were woven within the territory of Amer Jaipur? Number one.
Right.
Number two, is there any difference between the carpets which have these so called foreign or Mughal origins and the carpets which are quite indigenous to the region of Amer? That is my first query which I would like to know.
That is a very important question for me to clarify also, because to the best of our knowledge, in the 15th, no, in the 16th century, 17th century, carpets were not woven within the territory of the Kachwahas, within their Watan Jagir, within the
Right.
Dhoondhar area. But because the Kachwahas were everywhere in the Mughal Empire, their Faraj Khanas would always have had these precious carpets. They were a means of gifting, they were a means of display, they were a means of, usage. And some we have found, which my colleague Dr. Giles Tillotson pointed out, he says the way they are shaped, you can almost imagine that they would have been put in the Diwan Khana equivalent of Amer, maybe, and later. So they are actually shaped carpets which go around one of the pillars. Now, how many of them are from the local area? We have said none. Where are they from? What are the motives? Most of them, some of them probably were of Iranian, they're of Irani, um, maybe not making, but the influence is coming through from Central Asia, definitely. And something that our museum no longer has, but was originally part of the Jaipur collection, is this great garden carpet in the government museum in Jaipur. There's a story there actually that these were loaned just around the time of Indian independence, just after, for a foreign exhibition. And by the time they came back, Jaipur state was not there, so they came to Rajasthan. But so that influence is definitely there. Those motifs are there. How many of them were being done by various Mughal ateliers is difficult to tell. We definitely know that Lahore was a major center. I'm assuming Agra would have been a major center because material was coming into Agra. Was Jaipur a center? That's now you've got my mind working that way. It's not my area, but what we know is out of that very rich Jaipur collection, some of which got dismantled much before it became part of, in the old days, in the 1920s, 30s. We find some of them in Ahmedabad, in the Calico Museum also. So there's been a recent book looking at where some of these items have gone. And usually the color scheme, all of it is in consonance with what you would find in a Mughal Shehzada or another grandee's court. That is the kind of material we have. Why so many? That again is a question. I think more people probably need to research it. Stephen Cohen has been doing it for a while, and
Right.
at our end, some people have. So I think you've raised you जैसे होता ना, मेरे दिमाग में आपने एक कीड़ा आप छोड़ दिया है, तो अब उसका मुझे सोचना पड़ेगा कुछ. You also had a word, sir. So actually, हमारी जो paintings हैं, they are not in the tasveer khana at that point. The word being used earlier is the surat khana. Means the same, but tasveer is usually when it comes to the period of taking images with a camera. But I think you had a query about that too.
Right. Actually, having visited Jaipur a number of times and having visited not only Jaipur, Jaipur, after all, is an 18th century city, but having also visited the older palaces, जो आपका आमेर पैलेस है या नाहर जयगढ़ पैलेस है, I mean, you when you started your talk, you were also telling us कि जो यहाँ के जो monumental relics हैं, they also tell a major part of the story about the Mughal Rajput connections. Now, for example, the palaces at Amer very much resemble the palaces at Fatehpur Sikri. है ना, आगरा फोर्ट, फतेहपुर सीकरी, द सेम टाइप ऑफ जो आपका जो पुराना एरियाज जो वहाँ पे हैं, जिस टाइप के पिलर्स हैं, जिस टाइप के ब्रैकेट्स हैं, जिस टाइप का रेड सैंडस्टोन का इस्तेमाल है. आई मीन देयर इज मच एफिनिटी समटाइम्स. अगर आप किसी पर्टिकुलर बिल्डिंग में आप किसी को खड़ा कर दीजिए और ब्लाइंड फोल्डेड खड़ा कर दीजिए, तो उसके लिए ये बताना कि वो सीकरी में है या अकबर के किसी उसमें है कि आमेर में आ गया, it's sometimes difficult. Now that is why I am trying to draw parallel between the arts and objects in Jaipur, जो पूरा ये एरिया है, and Agra Fatehpur Sikri. For example, at Fatehpur Sikri, the माय करम भूमि जिस पे मैंने किताब लिखी है, now there is a building which possibly was a sort of a farrash khana. Hooks हैं जिसमें carpets शायद वहाँ टांग के और रखे जाते थे, you know. So that is very much there. There is a karkhana which is just outside the Diwan-e-Aam complex at Fatehpur Sikri, जो कारखाना कहलाता है, लेकिन if you go inside you would find that the mint, the carpet weaving, the all type of other works possibly were being conducted within the confines of this place. So जो सूरत खाना की आप बात कर रही हैं, तो हमको मुगल्स में भी, स्पेशली अकबर के पीरियड में भी ये पता चलता है कि some of those paintings were being made in these कारखानास. Although Akbarnama paintings जो हमको मिलती हैं, they were mostly painted at a time when the court was at Lahore, right? तो अगर हम सूरत खाना की बात करें, the type of miniatures from Jaipur area जो आपके यहाँ एक काफी तादाद में है, which are inspired by the Mughal miniatures. क्या आप उसके बारे में कुछ बताएंगे कि क्या बोरोइंग्स हैं या क्या डिफरेंसेस हैं जो सूरत खाना जो आमेर में था और जो सूरत खाना मुगल से?
जी, जो आमेर का सूरत खाना है उसके बारे में we don't have that much information now. What we have there are some wall murals of that period. वो लगता है कि at some stage they painted over some of those murals. So in Amer, there's a very famous Bhojanshala,
yes,
which has got paintings, but that seems to be more in the nature of what you would see at the back, maybe of a Deccan miniature, the landscape. So these are showing scenes of religious scenes, more or less, or scenes of pilgrimage to a site that has a religious significance. But it's a lot of cityscape, landscape, that you kind of need to sit and identify accordingly. उस वक्त के जो उस जमाने के जो मिनिएचर पेंटिंग्स अगर थे, they have probably been dispersed over the ages. And a lot of people find it strange. I'm diverging just for a moment here, but they say to us, where are your Amer records? And the Amer records are usually now with the state archives in Bikaner. Because now my own understanding, I don't have anyone telling me this, was Amer is the old home. They've made this new home in Jaipur, but they're not abandoning one or the other. It still continues to be in use. So whatever is in a store remains in a store. एक ट्रेडिशन वो भी है कि किसी महाराजा के वक्त के जो भी सामान है, at the death that would be sealed, and that would only be opened when another ruling Maharaja would say, open it up. But there were so many rooms that were just left at that time. So that tradition of artwork from Amer does not seem to be available to us now. But what we have from the 17th century, 18th century Jaipur, is two or three types. One, where the artists are deliberately copying Mughal miniatures or copying something in the Mughal miniature style. But when I said copying, we've actually got some physical copies of Aurangzeb sitting somewhere, and then the same thing copied
We're talking
at
about the
Jaipur
bazaar paintings, which of
paintings.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then we have the ones of family groups. So there's again a famous one in which you have, the Temurid line sitting. They're all rulers of different times, so they could not have all sat together. But we then have a similar one of the 15th century Raja Prithviraj, uh, of of uh, of Amer, and then his descendants sitting around. But then besides that, we also have things that were court scenes, or just normal human scenes. There is one I'm thinking of, which again is not in anything I would have shown you, but people should come and see our current day Surat Khana, which is the painting and photography gallery. A child being held in the arms of somebody, somebody who's a worker, a servitor, and he's pulled the turban off. So the turban is dangling, and this child is kind of, maybe a little prince is having a fit or something, which is such a human thing to, So they're little sketches, they're paintings of that nature also. That is probably something that would have been a smaller feature in one of the Mughal paintings. Now, just to keep that element, since you had that question, we had some famous local painters who got patronage, and one of them made a lot of portraits, and he made life-size portraits, which are in the Sabha Nivas part, which would have been the Diwane Am, or the Diwan Khana as they called it also. And one man basically covered about 50 years, so from Sawai Singh to great grandson's time, Sahib Ram. So you have that sort of images also, and maps. Now maps, I'm not sure how many maps the Mughals in the heydays would have had. I'm not sure how many even Shah Jahan or the others would have had, and whether they would have been functional. But we have some maps that Jai Singh, out of interest, had made. One of which is of the inside of Delhi Fort, which shows, um, उसमें Devanagari में he's written in it, and at first glimpse you will think Red Fort. It is Red Fort, and then you read the script and you wonder, is it somewhere else? Well, it is Red Fort. But he also had a copy made, not a copy. He had a map acquired, whether it was made for Savai Jai Singh or acquired, a map of Surat. So this ruler was interested in maps and he was collecting them.
Hold
Hence
on,
the Jaipur. Gee,
hold on. I
yes,
mean,
yes.
you are in fact giving us
Running,
so much.
I'm running ahead.
You are, flooding us with that. Type of things which are there. So let us deal with them one by one. Now, for example, you have the Bhojan Chala paintings on the walls. Hmm. If you read the book by Susan Goel on the Indian maps and plans, these paintings are given much prominence because possibly these are the first cartographic, attempts at showing the cities. Well, as you said, they are pilgrimage towns, but after all, they are, Ayodhya, for example, Saket, for example, Mathura, for that matter, Vrindavan, for that matter. A lot of these places which were being visited by the people, um, for as pilgrimage sites. They are there on the walls of the Bhojanchala, and they are in fact in the form of depicting the entire settlement with all
Yes,
the temples which were prominent during that period of time. Later on, as you say, there were also proper city maps. For
We're looking
example,
at one now.
pardon?
We are looking at one now on the screen.
You're looking at one now. It's a detailed map which is there, and I would like to point this out to the audience. देखिए, मैं यहाँ पे हुजा जी को रोक के मैं एक बात कहना चाहता हूँ कि मुगलों के बारे में ये कहा जाता है कि ये जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल आप सामने आपकी ये मैप है, मुगलों के बारे में ये कहा जाता है कि इनके यहाँ कोई प्लान ड्राइंग हमें सरवाइव करती हुई नहीं मिलती। ऑटोमन्स पे चले जाइए, जितने मेजर मॉन्यूमेंट्स हैं उसके आपको प्लान्स मिल जाएंगे। लेकिन क्या इज इट पॉसिबल दैट अ कॉम्प्लेक्स स्ट्रक्चर लाइक द ताज, or for that matter the type of description which has been given by Qazvini for the fort of Shahjahanabad, was it possible to create them without having a pre-plan जो बनाया हो? The only evidence as far as the Mughals are concerned is one plan which is there from Babarnama, जो शायद विक्टोरिया एल्बर्ट पे है कि डबलिन में है, आई एम forgetting at the moment, where Babar is shown inspecting a garden which is being made, and there is an architect जो हाथ में एक लाल रंग का ग्राफ पेपर जिसपे कुछ वैसा ही बना हुआ है जैसे इस प्रेजेंट मैप में आपको सामने नजर आ रहा है। ग्राफ पेपर पे लाइंस ड्रॉ की गई हैं जैसे ग्रिड पैटर्न होता है, और उससे वो डायरेक्शन दे रहा है, और मजदूर एक डोरी लेके और गार्डन को नाप के उस पैरामीटर के तहत उसको लेआउट कर रहे हैं। That is possibly the only evidence which we get as far as the Mughal plan making is concerned. कुछ इन लोगों का टेक्स्ट में जिक्र आ जाता है कि प्लान ड्रॉवर्स थे जो इन बिल्डिंग्स के प्लान बनाते थे। Actually, what type of plans were being made, उसकी अगर हमको कोई स्पेसिमेंस मिलना शुरू होते हैं, फिजिकल रिमेन मिलना शुरू होते हैं, तो डॉक्टर हुजा के म्यूजियम से मिलना शुरू होते हैं। इट इज ओनली फ्रॉम द सिटी पैलेस म्यूजियम। I would remind of the excellent work which was done at your museum by Chandramani Singh, a 2-volume work, the second volume of which was devoted only and only to the plates of these city maps and plans.
Yes.
Unfortunately, at the time when Chandramani Singh was writing this book or getting it published, वो ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट का जमाना था और बहुत बिजी फोटोग्राफ्स हैं। आई विश दैट अंडर यू उन प्लान्स को, उन चीजों को, आई मीन आई वुड रिमाइंड यू ऑफ द 1740s प्लान ऑफ द सिटी ऑफ आगरा जो आपके यहाँ मौजूद है,
हमारे यहाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
है ना, जिसके अंदर ये डिटेल तक दी गई है कि सवाई जयसिंह के अंडर में कौन सा पोर्शन है वॉल्स का जो अभी बनाया जा रहा है, एंड व्हाट आर द पोर्शंस व्हिच आर ऑलरेडी कंस्ट्रक्टेड, द नेम्स ऑफ ऑल द हवेलीज, नेम्स ऑफ ऑल द गार्डन्स। अगर आप उसको सामने रख लें तो पूरा कहाँ पे मिंट है आगरे का, कहाँ पे चौक है आगरे की, कहाँ है सर्राफा आगरे का, the entire details, at least from 1740s of the city of Agra, they are got from such type of maps which are located. और इस टाइप के मैप्स जो डॉक्टर हुजा आपको यहाँ पे दिखा रही हैं, जो ये मैप आपके सामने है, the grid pattern of the city of Jaipur, इसकी डिटेल्स वहां के ऊपर कई इस टाइप के मैप्स, कई सिटी मैप्स वहां के ऊपर प्रेजेंट है। And I think that that is one of the major aspects of the museum at City Palace in Jaipur, which has to be appreciated, क्योंकि ये knowledge, this interaction, जाहिर है कि जैसे मैंने आपसे कहा कि ये ताजमहल और ये बिल्डिंग्स बन ही नहीं सकती होंगी, लेकिन जो आपस में आदान प्रदान है दोनों उनका, राजपूतों का, जो भारमल के जमाने और अकबर के जमाने से मुगलों के साथ एसोसिएट हो गए हैं, और सिर्फ बिल्डिंग आर्किटेक्चर में ही नहीं, बल्कि तकरीबन हर कल्चरल एस्पेक्ट में जो ये आपस में इंटरैक्शंस हैं और जो लेन देन है, that is reflected in each and every artifact which is preserved at which is under the command of Dr. Hooja, जो आज जिसकी बात कर रही हैं. The last thing which you mentioned was सिले खाना. अनफॉर्चुनेटली अगेन ये वो एक एस्पेक्ट है जो मुगलों का हम लोग सुनते बहुत हैं, मिलता कहीं नहीं, सिवाय ये कि आगरा वो दिल्ली फोर्ट म्यूजियम में जो एक छोटा सा म्यूजियम है उसमें कुछ थोड़ा बहुत डिपिक्शंस है. मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द थिंग्स जो आपको वो इनफैक्ट रिलेटेड विद सिले खाना, दैट इज आल्सो गॉट फ्रॉम डॉक्टर हुजा's so I would like Dr. Hooja to speak a little more about these maps, number one, and the various armaments which are still conserved at the City Palace Museum at
Right.
Jaipur.
So, of course, for the maps, the word that they have used has been tarah. Ye tarah Jaipur hai, tarah Agra, and we are still using that term when we are keeping our records going. Frankly, Dr. Radavi, I'm not sure whether we would have had these maps if Jai Singh himself had not been interested. Now, somebody is obviously having maps made. It's not that he is unique in that sense. He may be unique in some ways. You need to have a patron to have the maps. So there is obviously a tradition of cartography. But do they all survive is the thing. And because of the interest of the individual who made Jaipur, he collected them. I feel that sometimes he's even had them drawn. In some cases, at the back of a tarah, there is a thing, is mall mein kharida hai, which has been put there in the 19th century. It's not an original one. As our audience may know, or sometimes may not, it's not just today when a book comes into a library that an accession number is put. Or, it's not just a government building or a college where they will paint 46 on a chair. Even in the old days, when something came, when a gift was given to a ruler or a zamindar or someone, it would be recorded. So the map recording, we know that some of them recordings are being made later on, and the maps seem to be of 100 years earlier. And the majority of the maps that we have are of cities, contemporary cities of that period. Not just that, Jai Singh was interested enough to have collected an international book of maps. Whether he also used it in making Jaipur is a different thing. We won't go into it now. What we have on display, not just locked up in the Potikhana, maybe you can go on to the next slide when you like, not just locked up in the Potikhana itself, but on display in the walls of, this is just to give another idea of the grid pattern of the city. And the next, please. In our painting and photography gallery, we have the Surat map, we have this Jaipur map, we have a Delhi map. So we have 3 of these right there, and we'd be very happy to eventually bring out more of these in a book form, which gives me another chance of coming back to the new Masterpieces book that is coming out later this month. I think you were talking about the Sile Khana, but if we can have a little thing and just go on a little bit of the architecture part. So if we see the architecture, as you had said, sir, earlier, these could be pan-Indian of that period. The influence of a mixture of Mughal art, a mixture of art that predated, so the Sultanate or the Malwa area or the Gujarat area or the kingdoms of the various Rajput rulers gets reflected in works like this. This again is 17th century. It is part of the city palace, but this is an embellished moment, but if you go on to this slide immediately after this, the plain one, these walls could be anywhere. It's geometric motifs. There is no human figure here. As it happens, It is part of the city palace, not part of the museum, part of the building there. And if we go on to the next, we will get to our Silekhana thing also. So this is just covering some of the points that Dr. Rizavi has mentioned, that we have textile, Silekhana, Sabanevas paintings. These were some, it's all right, we can carry on. These are some of the 18th century, yeah, these three images. We can go past them quickly. Were in the 19th century, when the British were trying to talk and discuss the Jaipur style or the school, and kind of break it down or simplify the understanding, both for the artisans, local people, and for display in Britain. So this portfolio was set up then. Now, this image is why the reason I'm saying is not just the artifacts that are behind a glass, but are the monuments which are standing, again, are reflecting the style which comes from the Mughal and the Rajput interactions. If we keep on with this, something that I have again, yes, I mean this is almost like a form of kashida. It's not, it's stonework. It's carving on the local stone. But another realization I've had over time is that the rulers of Amer and Jaipur went in the service of the empire to different parts of India. And while there, they made buildings there. So when one of them, when whether it's Mansingh the First or it is Jai Singh, get posted to a place like Sialkot or Nilab, they build a fort there or they build things there. When Jai Singh gets posted to Burhanpur, he will build something there, or Malwa. But they also borrow from those traditions. And that comes back. So ये जो आदान प्रदान है, ये जो exchange है, this is constant, evolving, ever changing, to the extent that the very famous Bangladar roof that becomes part of the architectural style is coming in from the time that Mansingh is governor. He is the Subedar of Bengal, and this is before Bengal and Bihar get separated also, but he's also Subedar of Bihar. He's also in charge of Orissa. Now, here again, as you mentioned, Dr. Razavi, this is part of our current, it's known by several names, Sarvato Bhadra. This is an image of the columns there. It is a Diwan-e Khas, but it is also a pattern that the reason it's Sarvato Bhadra is a pattern that you find at the Vrindavan temple, to which both Akbar and Jahangir gave a lot of grants personally to make the Govindev temple at Vrindavan. That is because this, which could be an image from any part of the Mughal world, has little rooms and four corners, which makes it not just a hall, but the Sarvatu Bhadra. But again, this could be taken from any part. And again, this is Jaipur with its the fabled, in stories we have Saat Male ki ya Saat Manzil ke Mahal, and we have a Saat Manzil ka Mahal behind it, Saat Male ka Mahal behind it. But the facade, the use of the red, this is painted red. This is not, sorry, I have to, this is not the red sandstone that you find in Delhi and Agra, even though a lot of the red sandstone has gone from Rajasthan, but it's not what the Kachwahas would have had. So they have got chunagara, lime, mortar, and painted it, whether then or later, but it is again. And the next image, please. We will get to our Silekhana very soon. If not, I will still carry on with the question that we have of the Silekhana. Now, a lot of objects were constantly being exchanged. They were not just being bought. They were being gifted. They were being exchanged. They were being specially made. They were being embellished. And the karigari known from various places. So in the case of Amer and in the case of Jaipur, both, artisans were deliberately invited. One of the reasons, thank you for this image, which gives another glimpse, and I will come back to what I was saying, is again a view from the top of the palace, which shows you the Jantar Mantar in one part. But certain elements of this tell you it is Jaipur. Other elements could be, again, pan India of that period. The next, please. So, part of the gifting, yes, this is something we haven't really published. It's an older image of the Sabha Nivas before these five arches in the middle were semi filled up. And this shows you the original Diwan Khana as it was, which could come out of Delhi or Agra, or for that matter, Lahore forts, the Mughal forts. This is how much similarity there is. This is an image that again is pan. It could be a typical Rajput building. It's a hall. It could easily fit into Agra also. Let's go on to the next. There was sort of a these are later developments which come with the British influence on the kind of Rajput Mughal architecture. We don't have to focus too much on it, but let's go on to the next if we can. Back to Atarez, the map of Surat, handmade. What sets this one out is that the script is Farsi, Persian, as well as Devanagari. And that is probably because the ruler had it annotated for himself. Next, please. If it's okay, so the Potikhana is one of our more important collections. The maps were in the Potikhana, the ones that Dr. Chandramani is unfortunately not very well now with age. So one of us will have to bring out, an annotated version of or an edited version of her wonderful work. We can carry on. These are some of the manuscripts that we have. We also have illustrated manuscripts, not just the maps, in which, again, this is Saras Granth. The script is both Devanagari and Farsi. It is being researched. It has been written about in the past, but it is being written about now also. Textiles, they had put in images, but we can go past where and stay with this now for a moment. So the Sileh Khana is the tradition of you need weapons because you need them for protection, but you also need them for ceremonial purposes. And this is a helmet made for a child. It is shaped like a turban, and it is a ceremonial turban, ceremonial helmet with gold work, so koftgiri and gold and embellishments. Um, some of these we know are of Mughal manufacture by the image on it. Sorry, one of the cats is pulling a cord. Let's go. What are the names of some of the prominent authors, the books, the Potikhana, subjects on which they wrote? Can I refer to my big fat
You can answer
history of
these questions.
Rajasthan here? You can see those. Let's go on to the next images. You will have a list of writers in
We
that.
will have the
So,
questions later on. Please don't
yes.
put up the
So we have
questions.
these hilts of swords. We have the mayans of swords made on velvet and printed, where again the reflections will, the images of the weapons available in the Silekhana will tell us what their origin has been. This again is a scimitar. Next, please. I'm not sure how many I've put in here. Now, this particular shield is in a sort of contrast to the work you saw on the previous couple of images. And this one it is made in the time of Sawai Pratap Singh. More of the images which are traditional to that area, including the clan goddess, come in here. But the idea of having a sword of a shield, and the tradition between of putting gold work, of embellishing it, of putting minakari on this is definitely there. Sorry, cat has just grabbed. I'm going to charger, which I will need. So I'm doing this while I talk. There we go. Next, please. You did have a question about the Silekhana, but I think this is the nearest I am getting to it. We can carry on with the images. One of the ways we know that we have elements from the Mughal world is sometimes they have got silk, a lot of silk, but when it comes to fabric that the Mughals were using, or the Mughals have gifted, khillat diye hai as a robe of honor, is the material known as mushru, which is a mixture. It is not pure cotton nor pure silk, but it's a mixture. It's not silkworm silk by itself. So a lot of mushroom objects are part of the tradition which come in with the Mughal exchanges. I think this was just another of the images. Are we repeating, or maybe I've put them in twice? Are we going back? I think we're going back. Just go back and we just talk of something. If the images are over, we can put that off and be less distracted, maybe, and come back to Dr. Razavi's questions. Let's just get rid of the rest of our yes, and come back to the question. So the objects in the museum are definitely reflecting a very close interaction, a very close relationship, a very close learning, and taking it to another stage of um, the interaction that is taking place, that is an everyday interaction. And I think one of the points I was trying to make is when someone like Mansingh gets posted in Bengal, he's not just building there when he builds a whole city of Rajnagar in the Rajmahal area, Rajmahal Santal area. He is also bringing back, he's borrowing back. And that tradition gets into the built heritage of Rajasthan because it comes to Jaipur or it comes to Amer, and from there it spreads to other areas. It becomes part of the built tradition of northern India coming in from there. Similarly, when someone like Sawai Jai Singh is posted at Burhanpur or posted at Malwa or posted at Agra, he sees the water collection system of Burhanpur. And when he is making his own city of Jaipur, he is conscious of bringing in water in a certain way. He's not necessarily copying what is done there, but he brings that in. The gardens of Agra, Jamna Park, that, as much as maybe the Mewar garden tradition, is what inspires this whole line, which is the Jaipur to Agra road has this area where you got the Vidyadhar garden, the Sisodia Rani ka Mahal. It was known as Ghat ki, it is known as Purana Ghat at one time. The current word is Ghat ki Ghuni. Ghuni was because of the curves in it. And it had an older gate called the Machi Darwaza, which actually dated back to the Mughal period. It wasn't made by the Mughals, it was made as a reception gateway in the hope that Akbar would be coming that way. He didn't use it, but that was knocked down, unfortunately, within the 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when we should have known better. But these working traditions are as much a part of the common Sanji Virasat as the items in our museum. And I would again hand it back to Dr. Zavi for another of his insightful queries, which make me think, but would like to at the same time welcome all of you to come and see our collection and understand for yourself what this the objects that we have can mean, what our prism shows of these through these artifacts.
Well, Dr. Hooja, I mean, I really must thank you for bringing out, these objects to the common, general students who are interested in history. And I do hope that they come over now that the pandemic is receding very fast, and they would be traveling and going to City Palace Museum. And I think this should be stop number one for all those who are interested in understanding the 17th, 18th century India. Having said that, and having visited your museum a number of times, let me also just say that the artifacts which are there in Dr. Hooja's charge are not only confined only to these which were brought out today by her. I mean, there are many other. For example, those beautiful vessels of water of silver. I mean, there are a large number of medieval vessels uh, which are there, utensils which are there, apart from armaments, apart from furniture. In fact, furniture is also one of the aspects which is on display in City Palace Museum at Amer, at City Palace Museum at Jaipur. I would, however, like to point out two more things. One, something which is crucially important for our understanding of the past. All of us know that the task of translating the Hindu texts, the religious texts, the texts of science, mathematics, texts dealing with literature, which were there in Sanskrit, were ordered by Akbar to be translated into Persian. A number of them are also held by the City Palace Museum at Jaipur. For example, one of the best collections which they have is a manuscript of the Ramayana, illustrated Ramayana. It's an object to be seen. I mean, the type of, sometimes some of the depictions of the miniatures in this text reminds you of the Akbarnama paintings themselves. I mean, the style. Sometimes even Lord Ram, who has been depicted there on the pages of this illustrated Ramayana, sometimes reminds you of the portrait of Akbar in the Akbarnama. बाज़ दफ़ा आप बिल्कुल ऑफ हैंड आप किसी एक्सपर्ट की निगाह से नहीं, एक आम इंसान की निगाह से अगर आप अचानक देखिएगा, जो आर्टिस्ट वहां के ऊपर राम जी को डिपिक्ट करना चाह रहा है और अकबरनामा में एक दूसरे आर्टिस्ट ने अकबर को डिपिक्ट किया है, तो एक जल्दी की नजर में आपको लगेगा कि जैसे दोनों को एक ही स्टाइल पे दिखाया है, बिल्कुल वही स्टाइल जो एक इंपीरियल अथॉरिटी का है, वही स्टाइल राम का है, या ये कह लीजिए कि जो विष्णु के अवतार का राम का स्टाइल है, वही स्टाइल उधर उसी आर्टिस्ट ने अकबर. सम ऑफ दीज आर्टिस्ट आर आल्सो द सेम, जो रामायणा को भी इलस्ट्रेट कर रहे हैं और अकबरनामा में भी इलस्ट्रेशन कर रहे हैं. सो दैट इज वन ऑफ द एस्पेक्ट्स जो इनके म्यूजियम का, दैट इज समथिंग टू बी सीन. और एक जो बिल्ट हेरिटेज है, जैसे पूजा जी ने कहा कि सिर्फ हमारे आप आर्टिफैक्ट्स मत देखिए, बल्कि हमारे उन स्ट्रक्चर्स को भी देखिए जो इन्होंने अपने स्लाइड्स में भी सिटी पैलेस के बहुत से आपको एस्पेक्ट्स दिखाए. कहीं पे वो अकबरी आर्किटेक्चर को डिपिक्ट कर रहे हैं, स्पेशली जो आमेर किले का के अंदर जो बिल्डिंग्स हैं, वहाँ अकबरी आर्किटेक्चर को इन्वोक किया गया. सिटी पैलेस के अंदर जैसे हम लोगों ने देखा, बैलेस्टर कॉलम्स हैं, कस्प आर्चेस हैं, जिस टाइप के डेकोरेशंस हैं, वो शाहजहां के पीरियड ऑनवर्ड्स में जिस टाइप का एक आर्किटेक्चरल ट्रेडिशन डेवलप हुआ था उसको दिखाया गया है. लेकिन इसी सिटी पैलेस के कन्फाइंस में, इसी इलाके में एक और स्ट्रक्चर है जो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, जिसको अलूड किया हुजा जी ने, उसका नाम लिया, लेकिन समहाउ उसके ऊपर हम लोग ज्यादा नहीं कर पाए, और वो था गोविंद देव टेम्पल. जो गोविंद टेम्पल जो अकबर ने ग्रांट दिया था राजा मान सिंह के कहने पे, the work was sponsored by Raja Man Singh. The grants were given by Akbar, later on by Jahangir and Shah Jahan. and a temple, Govind Dev temple, was built at Vrindavan. आज भी उसके डॉक्यूमेंट्स मौजूद हैं, और वेरी रिसेंटली प्रोफेसर इरफान हबीब ने उन डॉक्यूमेंट्स को कलेक्ट करके उस पर एक किताब भी लिखी है. और आज भी जो वृंदावन में महंत जी श्री वत्स गोस्वामी जी के पास सारे डॉक्यूमेंट हैं. लेकिन जब आज आप गोविंद देव टेम्पल जाएंगे तो अब वो गोविंद देव टेम्पल जो है वो टेम्पल नहीं है, क्योंकि उसमें से जो इमेज है वो वहां से ट्रांसफर करके, इनफैक्ट दी कछवाहास took out the idol from there and built another temple very near to their own palace in Jaipur. उसका भी नाम गोविंद देव टेम्पल. और उसकी जो बिल्डिंग है वो भी उसी स्टाइल की है जैसे पूजा जी ने कभी स्लाइड दिखाई थी, जिसमें ओपन हॉल विद कस्प आर्चेस, बैलेस्टर कॉलम्स. और ओरिजिनल गोविंद देव टेम्पल और जो सिटी पैलेस के अंदर जो गोविंद देव टेम्पल, दोनों में एक चीज कॉमन है कि अनलाइक दी अदर टेम्पल्स, इनमें सरफेस डेकोरेशन में ज्योमेट्रिकल आर्ट है, फ्लोरल डिजाइन है, लेकिन जो स्कल्पचरल डिजाइन जो होना चाहिए था, जो स्कल्पचर्स मौजूद होना चाहिए था, वो गर्भगृह के अलावा हार्डली कहीं पे दिखाया गया है. लेकिन मैं हुजा जी आपको भी जाहिर है आपको मालूम होगा, लेकिन जस्ट टू रिमाइंड एवरीवन कि स्कल्पचर गोविंद देव टेम्पल वृंदावन और जयपुर के मंदिरों में नहीं है. बिल्कुल ऐसा लगता है कि दोनों बिल्डिंग्स जो हैं वो सेंट्रल एशियन पैटर्न पे बनी हुई, इंडियन स्टाइल है. मैं सेंट्रल एशियन इसलिए कह रहा हूँ कि उसमें आपको हर चीज मिलेगी एक्सेप्ट स्कल्पचर, इसलिए मैंने वो टर्म यूज किया. ओपन हॉल, जैसे शाहजहानाबाद के किले का जो दीवाने आम का जो बिल्डिंग है, पिलर्ड हॉल्स, गैलरी आफ्टर गैलरी उसमें बना हुआ है, सिर्फ गर्भगृह में वो डिजाइन. लेकिन अकबर का आपका जो पैलेस है फतेहपुर सीकरी में, उसके ब्रैकेट्स के ऊपर स्कल्पचर मौजूद, उसके अंदर राम हनुमान डिपिक्ट किए गए, उसमें एक वॉल के ऊपर एक पेंटिंग बनाई गई है, म्यूरल बनाया गया है, जिसमें एक फिगर है जो बिल्कुल गणेश जी जैसी है. एक म्यूरल है, एक मिनिएचर पेंटिंग है, जिसमें एक बड़ा सा टेम्पल विद शिखर नजर आ रहा है. लेकिन जब यही कछवाहास अपने यहाँ बना रहे हैं तो वहां के ऊपर एक दूसरा, तो ये जो मैं कहने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि जो आपस के जो मिली जुली एक साझा एक विरासत जो है, कि वो एक दूसरे को एलिमेंट्स को यूज कर रहे हैं. अकबर को उन स्कल्पचर्स को यूज करने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, कछवाहास को उन मंदिरों को बिल्कुल पैलेशियल स्टाइल में बनाने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं. उनके बिल्डिंग्स में यहाँ का है, इनके यहाँ झरोका है, तो वहां के ऊपर भी वो एलिमेंट्स हैं जो मुगल आर्किटेक्चर से लिए. दीज आर सम ऑफ द एस्पेक्ट्स जो इस, अगर आप सिटी पैलेस म्यूजियम को जाएं और उसकी बिल्डिंग को देखें, उसके स्ट्रक्चर्स को चारों तरफ देखें, उसके अंदर जो आर्टिफैक्ट्स जो हुजा जी ने आज डिस्कस किए हैं उनको देखें, तब आपको पता चलेगा कि आज जो 2014 के बाद जो हमें बताने की कोशिश की जा रही है कि कैसा हिंदुस्तान होना चाहिए, वो हिंदुस्तान कम से कम 17th-18th सेंचुरी में नहीं था. वो एक ऐसा हिंदुस्तान था कि जहां रूलर्स तो थे, पॉलिटिकल पावर्स तो थी, अपने अपने मजहब को मानते भी थे, झगड़े भी होते थे, दोस्ती भी होती थी, लेकिन मजहब को वो अपने पे हावी करके नहीं चलते थे. अकबर एक ऐसा किंग था जो सूफी ट्रेडिशन से भी बोरो कर रहा था, विष्णु का अवतार भी था. ब्राह्मण सुबह उठ के उसकी शक्ल देख के झरों का दर्शन भी करते थे. और इधर कछवाहों के यहाँ एक वो ट्रेडिशन था कि अगर आप आंखें बंद करके चले जाएंगे तो आपको पता ही नहीं चलेगा कि आप किसी मुगलों के दरबार में मौजूद हैं या आप राजपूतों के बीच में चले गए. इनफैक्ट पूजा जी, जो राजपूतों की राइज है, एक फ्लोरेसेंस है. इनफैक्ट इट इज सेड that it is only during the period when Babar was going to attack the country, at the time when he makes his entrance. It is around that time that the Rajaputras started developing as large zamindar. वही वो पीरियड है कि जब और इतनी आपस में दोस्ती इन दोनों की हो जाती है कि औरंगजेब जिसको लास्ट हम लोग ग्रेट मुगल रूलर कहते हैं, आजकल उसको बड़ी गाली पड़ती है। बहुत सी उसकी ऐसी हरकतें भी थी कि जिसपे उसको गाली देना भी चाहिए, क्योंकि बहरहाल जिस अंदाज में उन्होंने मजहब को पॉलिटिक्स से मिलाया था, आज भी उसका असर देख रहे हैं। औरंगजेब के पीरियड में देखने को मिला था, लेकिन जो राजपूतों की और मुगलों की दोस्ती थी वो औरंगजेब की उस पॉलिसी से भी इफेक्ट नहीं हुई थी। It is an incident which dates back to the last decade of Aurangzeb's reign. When there is a Mughal princess who is being traveling from one area to another, और उनके चारों तरफ उनके प्रोटेक्शन के लिए जो सोल्जर्स हैं वो राजपूत कमांडर्स हैं जो उसको प्रोटेक्ट कर। मराठों की अटैक होती है, मराठास वांट टू सराउंड एंड कैप्चर दिस वुमन। मैं इस वक्त नाम भूल रहा हूँ उस राजपूत कमांडर का। He goes to the Mughal princess and says, "Don't worry. Ismate Rajputiya wa Chaftaiya yakast." Honor of the Rajputs and Mughals is. In fact, during the reign of Aurangzeb, एक तो
बूंदी के हाड़ा थे वो
जी,
बूंदी के हाड़ा थे
जी, राम सिंह हाड़ा शायद, हाँ, जो औरंगजेब के पीरियड में जो मिर्जा राजा जय सिंह, who had been appointed as the Subadar of the Deccan. Letter after letter, he writes to Aurangzeb that he wanted, as the Subadar, to follow the same policy in the Deccan what Akbar had followed for the Rajputs in the north. तो ये जो आपस में जो ताल्लुकात डेवलप हुए थे इन दोनों कम्युनिटीज के, जो भाड़मल के ज़माने से, अकबर के ज़माने से, और बिल्कुल एंड तक वो चलते हैं। और आज भी अगर उसकी लिविंग एग्जाम्पल आपको इस दौर में भी देखना है तो एक ही जगह है जहां आप उसे जाके देख सकते हैं, एंड दैट इज जयपुर। चाहे वो जयपुर के गार्डन्स हो, चाहे वहाँ के म्यूजियम्स हो, इनफैक्ट यहाँ तक के जो जयगढ़ फोर्ट है, अगर किसी मुगल आपको पैलेस को समझना है तो गो टू जयगढ़। वहाँ पे जो मैडम हुजा ने जिक्र किया अबाउट गन फाउंड्री, किस टाइप से पर्शियन व्हील के इस्तेमाल से कैनन्स के मजल को बनाया जाता था, कैसे वेल्ड किया जाता था, कैसे अंदर से उसे पॉलिश किया जाता था, पूरी मशीनरी आज भी सरवाइव करती है फॉर ऑल ऑफ टू सी। So, I mean, I would request Shagufta to put up only one or two questions because we have already taken 1.5 hours. So, a question by Yu Hassan and then by Mirza Hassan. Yu Hassan ji asks, not sure if this is within the scope of this talk, but I am curious as to how the Rajput Mughal cuisines were affected by the interaction between these two groups in the medieval period.
This is a very interesting question, and I think I would actually want more people, somebody who, because there's a lot of work nowadays on food, on what is happening. You see, one thing we forget, this period, Akbar's period, or around that time, is the time that the world is becoming more aware of food items from South America, the New World. So a lot of things that we consider typically Indian today, was not available before that. Green chilies, potatoes, tomatoes, makka ka we are not very sure whether they had maize or not, which seems to be typical here. So there is exchange certainly, there is also an adherence. There are sometimes people get stubborn and will say, I will only eat this. It's a question I can't really truly answer about the scope of the interaction. There was obviously interaction, but I will give you another example to understand it with. And that is when of the rulers of Bikaner got posted to the Deccan by the Mughal emperor, and he saw the ark plant there. The ark, if you have not seen it, it's a broad green leaf, उसपे सफेद and slightly purplish flower होता है. The milk of it, or the sap, is white and poisonous, but it grows in the desert area. And this Bikaner ruler sees it in the Deccan, and he's homesick, and he says, oh, what are you doing here? I'm here because the Badshah sent me. But who exiled you? Not quite exiled, but who sent you here? So local things travel, local things mingle. uh, the typical Mughlai cuisine would probably not have developed if they had not been in India in the first place. So many of the elements come in from India. The Rajput food is chili hot today. It would not have been chili hot, but some of the food items that come in, I think this is actually a topic for another talk at some point. I think we would follow up on this. अगला सवाल ले लें.
बिल्कुल. Mirza Hasnain, Rajput rulers of Amer kept using the title of Sawai, that means one plus quarter, as was given by Emperor Aurangzeb to Maharaja Jai Singh too. Just like Nizam kept using the title of Nizam even after Mughal dynasty was ended in 1857. Do we have any artifact or logo that celebrate this title of Sawai on it? Were Rajput Mughal relations still intact after Shah Alam II's death? Any artifact of their interactions after 1800s?
Okay. So again, a very good question. Uh, One way in which the Sawai element is still in the face, almost literally, of everyone who knows Jaipur is that the city palace, they're entitled to have the old flag, and they use the quarter flag also, the Sawai flag, and that is a direct link. So the logo is very much a smaller size of the old Jaipur flag that is used is the Sawai flag. The much earlier, one of the khitabs that they had got was the Mahi Maratib emblem, which is a fish-shaped emblem that a lot. In fact, they were not just the Jaipur or the Dhoondhar rulers, but other places also got it, and that is still in use. In fact, it is pulled out and it is shown for the Shastra Puja, which happens just before the Shera, on the Shera day, by the rulers of Jaipur, and it is being used. Now, the thing of were the relations still intact? Now, in 1857, several of the rulers either took the side of the East India Company or took the side of Bahadur Shah Zafar. So the relationships are definitely recognized, known, carried on. They don't just end at an X period, they get overtaken by other friendships. So again, the analogy is more like, you don't quite give up on a childhood friend, but you may not have met them in the last 40 years. And it is a bit like that what is once part of the tradition carries on is not fully given up. Just because I've just remembered it, I want to add something else, which is not necessarily Mirza Hasnain's point, but Dr. Zavi talked about the temples of Jaipur. And so the style that we call them is, we say Jaipur ke Haveli temples, Haveli style of temples, because they are made without the exterior emblems. The Garbhagriha will have the statues, but the buildings are plain. They often do not have a shikhar. Most of Jai Singh the Second's buildings in Jaipur, Sawai Jai Singh, since we are talking about Sawai, they use Sawai even you know into the 20th century. So Sawai Jai Singh made a lot of these temples of Jaipur. I think only a couple of them have a shikhar, what the average Indian would assume to be a Hindu, temple should have the shikhar. Whereas they are in the Haveli style, it's only one Kalki temple which has a shikhar. So this is some of the. It's not an anomaly. It's just the way things were. It's just the way people lived.
बिल्कुल आप सही कह रही हैं कि उस पीरियड में जिस टाइप से हम लोग रिलीजियस बिल्डिंग्स को आज जिन चीज़ों से हम आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं, ये बहुत सी चीज़ें ऐसी हैं कि जो ये हम बिल्कुल मॉडर्न पीरियड में उनसे एसोसिएट हो गई हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल, ये सोचना कि बगैर शिखर के टेम्पल नहीं हो सकती, तो जाहिर है कि जैसे आपने बताया कि पूरे आमेर रीजन में जो हवेली स्टाइल ऑफ टेम्पल्स है कि एक टिपिकल, उसी तरह अगर आप अवध के रीजन में चले जाइए, अयोध्या में चले जाइए, तो जो डोम है जो आप एसोसिएट करते हैं मस्जिद के साथ, वो आपको मंदिर का पार्ट मिलेगा। आज भी अगर आप सरयू तट पे आप चले जाएंगे, जहाँ के ऊपर आजकल बहुत उसको अच्छी तरह डेवलप किया जा रहा है उस एरिया को, और वहाँ के ऊपर रामनवमी और दूसरे फेस्टिवल्स मनाए जाते हैं। वहां जाके अगर आप उस टेम्पल्स को देखिएगा तो आपको लगेगा जैसे ये अचानक अयोध्या में इतने बहुत सारे मस्जिदें कहाँ से आ गई। या फॉर दैट मैटर, जब मस्जिदों का जिक्र आप कीजिएगा तो शाहजहां से पहले जो आज आप सोचते हैं कि मीनार तो होना ही चाहिए मस्जिद में, तो मुगल किसी भी मॉस्क में मीनार आपको नहीं मिलेगा। पहली बार आपको जो मीनार मिलना शुरू करेगा मुगल मस्जिदों में, वो शाहजहां के पीरियड ऑनवर्ड्स मिलेगा। आगरा में पहली बार हेजिटेंट अंदाज में जो जहानारा की बनवाई हुई जामा मस्जिद है किले के पास, छोटे छोटे से मिनरेट्स पहली बार वहां मिलेंगे। दिल्ली की जामा मस्जिद में 2 सिलेंडर आपको मिनरेट्स मिलेंगे, और औरंगजेब का टाइम आते आते तो सबसे खूबसूरत मुगल मॉस्क जो लाहौर में बनाई गई थी, बादशाही मस्जिद ऑफ लाहौर, उसमें आपको 4 मीनारे नजर आएंगे। इसी तरीके से इससे पहले भी मैं आपके सामने अर्ज कर चुका है इसे पहले किसी एक मौके पे, फिर मैं अभी आप दोहरा दूं, क्योंकि हम लोग एक ऐसी तहजीब की बात कर रहे हैं जहां दोनों रिलीजन्स की मिक्सिंग चल रही है, कि हिंदुस्तान की सरजमीन के बाहर, सब कॉन्टिनेंट ऑफ इंडिया जिसे आज आप कहते हैं, उसके बाहर कोई एक मस्जिद मुझे दिखा दीजिए जिसमें हिंदुस्तानी मॉस्क्स की तरह ट्रिपल डोम्स हो, 3 गुंबद, जिसमें सेंट्रल गुंबद जरा ऊंचा हो और साइड में। इज इट जस्ट अ रिमाइंडर ऑफ द कंसेप्ट ऑफ ट्रिनिटी? वट एवर इट इज, ये एक हियरार्की, इससे नीचे से ऊपर, उसके ऊपर से ऊपर, ये एक पूरा सिस्टम, और ट्रिपल डोम, ये हिंदुस्तान की मस्जिदों में शायद यहाँ के कल्चर का असर है जिसके से मिलता है। तो जो जिस तहजीब की हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं, वो ये बात कर रहे हैं कि कैसे ये आपस में मिलजुल के एक तहजीब इकट्ठा हुई थी, जिसका यहाँ के ऊपर पूरा हम लोगों ने जिक्र किया। और आई वुड वंस अगेन थैंक प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर हुजा, माही मरातिब। जाहिर है एक मुगल टाइटल था, एक मुगल एक तरीके से एक ऑनर था जो दिया जाता था, फिश सिंबल का जो उनके फ्लैग्स पे लगाया जाता था, वो जयपुर में भी दिया गया, दूसरी जगह भी दिया गया। और जाहिर है कि जो पूरी रियासत, जो पूरा जो किंगशिप जो उभर के जयपुर में आती है, दैट इज बेस्ड ऑन दी मुगल कंसेप्ट ऑफ किंगशिप। पूरा अंदाज वही है। और मुगल अंदाज क्या है हुकूमत का, अगर आप उसको पढ़ना चाहें तो उसमें आप देखेंगे कि जो राजपूतों के कंसेप्ट्स हैं उनको वहाँ मिला दिया गया है। तो दोनों के यहाँ एक दूसरे के आपको व्यूज और आपको अंदाज नजर आते हैं। There are many other questions, there are many other comments, Dr. Hooja, but there is a shortage of time. 1 hour 44 minutes have passed since you joined. I am sorry कि आपके slides में, आपके PowerPoint में there was some technical difficulty, and not all of them.
देख लिए सर, हमने सब देख लिए. Don't apologize for that. We had a good discussion without.
Right. There are many other things. For example, एक चीज और जो हुजा जी के उसमें होना मेरे ख्याल में किसी भी डिस्कशन में आना चाहिए, वो वहाँ की ऑब्जर्वेटरीज का एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल एंड एस्ट्रोनॉजिकल जो नॉलेज थी, और जो मुगलों के यहाँ जो एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल डिटेल्स है वो सेंट्रल एशिया से भी डिराइव हो रही है, और वो इंडिजिनस तरीके से भी ली जा रही है, और जो जयपुर के जो रूलर्स हैं वो उसको इम्बाइब कर रहे हैं. जो ऑब्जर्वेटरीज, जो जंतर मंतर दिल्ली में मौजूद है, उससे पहले का जंतर मंतर, बल्कि ये कहिए कि सवाई जयसिंह ने कई शहरों में उस टाइप की ऑब्जर्वेटरीज बनाई थी. बनारस में भी बनाई थी, दिल्ली में भी कायम की थी, और बल्कि मथुरा में कायम की थी. और फॉर दैट मैटर आप में से जो लोग कभी अगर जयपुर जाएं, तो जयपुर जाएंगे तो आप लोग जयगढ़ और नाहरगढ़ भी जरूर विजिट करेंगे. जयगढ़ और नाहरगढ़ दोनों पहाड़ी के ऊपर मौजूद हैं. नाहरगढ़ तो 18th सेंचुरी आ जाता है, सिटी पैलेस के साथ साथ है, और जयगढ़ जो है उससे पहले का है. लेकिन दोनों के बीचों बीच में जो एक मॉडर्न रोड रन करती है, जो पॉसिबली एक ओल्ड हाईवे है जो इन दोनों किलों को जोड़ता है, बीचों बीच में वन ऑफ द हाईएस्ट पॉइंट्स एक छोटा सा मंदिर बना, जो देखने में मंदिर है, लेकिन उसके पास एक ट्रायंगुलर एक स्ट्रक्चर है, जिसकी एक तरफ से ट्रायंगल का एक जो है जिसपे सीढ़ियां हैं जो ऊपर जाती हैं, उसके ऊपर एक छतरी बनी हुई है, और इस छतरी का जो क्यूपोला है उसमें चारों तरफ उसके स्लिट्स, होल्स, लूप्स दिए हुए हैं, जिससे रोशनी अंदर जा सकती है और बाहर जा सकती है. My personal opinion about that structure, and I discussed that with Professor S.R. Sharma. Professor S.R. Sharma is one of those जिन्होंने astronomical objects पे काम किया. He was a professor at Aligarh Muslim University in the Department of Sanskrit. He has also written a large number of works on developments of science and especially astronomy under the Mughals. उनके साथ भी मैंने उसको डिस्कस किया, एंड पॉसिबली दैट वाज द फर्स्ट ऑब्जर्वेटरी जिसकी शायद रीडिंग सही नहीं आ रही थी, देयर वाज सम फॉल्ट, उसको अबैंडन कर दिया गया. इनफैक्ट दैट इज द फर्स्ट ऑब्जर्वेटरी. उसके बाद फिर जो सिटी पैलेस म्यूजियम के पास बाहर की तरफ जो जंतर मंतर जो बना हुआ है, वो बाद में सवाई जयसिंह वगैरह ने बनवाया था. तो दैट इज अनदर एस्पेक्ट जिसपे किस तरह से टाइम कीपिंग, किस टाइप से इन पूरे जोडियाकल मूवमेंट्स, उस जो एक जीच मोहम्मद शाही वगैरह जो एक सेंट्रल एशियन ट्रेडिशन था जो आ रहा था, और एक राजस्थानी ट्रेडिशन. याद रखिए कि इवन जब शाहजहानाबाद या कोई भी किला ये बनाते थे, जब तक इन एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल टेबल्स को, इन इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स, इन यंत्रों के साथ वो टेस्ट नहीं कर लेते थे, न जगह को वो मुअय्यन करते थे कहाँ चीज बनाई जाएगी, न किस वक्त उसका फाउंडेशन रखा जाएगा, उसको भी तय नहीं करते थे. और ये जो सेंट्रल एशियन और राजपूत नॉलेज थी, इस फील्ड में भी मिलके, याद रखिए कि अकबर के पीरियड में जब सिनॉप्सिस को चेंज किया गया, आज भी न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी आ रही है, अकबर के जमाने में भी एक न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी आई थी जिसका पहला जिक्र मिलता है, जिसमें जो रिलीजियस सब्जेक्ट्स पढ़ाए जा रहे थे, उसके साथ साथ उसने सेकुलर सब्जेक्ट्स लाइक साइंस, मैथमेटिक्स, एस्ट्रोलॉजी, एस्ट्रोनॉमी, कीमिया, मेडिसिन, दीज वर द सब्जेक्ट्स विच वर एडेड. और उसके अंदर ये जो ऑब्जर्वेटरी वगैरह थी, इनको भी डेवलप करवाया था, उसकी बात की थी, और उसके रिमेन्स आपको जयपुर में मिल जाएंगे. तो मेरा सजेशन अपने स्टूडेंट से, क्योंकि मैं हुजा जी, मैं मिडिवल इंडिया का एक छोटा सा एक स्टूडेंट हूँ, और मैं अपने स्टूडेंट्स को हमेशा ये सजेस्ट कर रहा हूँ कि अगर आपको चाहे वो मुगल आर्किटेक्चर समझना हो या मुगल कल्चर समझना हो, तो आगरे और फतेहपुर सीकरी से पहले आप जयपुर चले जाइए, और जयपुर में ये जो आमेर, नाहरगढ़, जयगढ़ और सिटी पैलेस, जब इनको आप देख लेंगे तो आपको उस पीरियड का राजपूताना भी समझ में आ जाएगा, इंडियन कल्चर भी समझ में आ जाएगा, और मुगलों पे उसका क्या असर था या मुगलों ने उनको क्या दिया था, और मुगल आर्किटेक्चर किस अंदाज में डेवलप किया था, वो भी आपको समझ में आ जाएगा. With these words, I would once again thank Dr. Hooja, and I would wish that she would be here once again with us to talk to us on some other aspect जो उनकी होल्डिंग्स में शामिल है. I would request her कि कभी आप हमें जो वहाँ के जो कार्टोग्राफिक ट्रेडिशंस हैं, जो जो भोजनशाला जो वहाँ के ऊपर डिपिक्शंस दिए हुए हैं, और जो पिलग्रिमेज सेंटर्स हैं, टाउन्स हैं, उनका जो वहाँ पर डिपिक्शन जो दिया हुआ है, अनफॉर्चुनेटली हमेशा लॉक एंड की में रहता है. आई वाज फॉर्चुनेट इनफ टू हैव अ लुक एट दैट. फोटो नहीं खींच पाया था, लेकिन वो एक ऐसा एस्पेक्ट है जो जाहिर होना चाहिए, क्योंकि उससे दो तीन चीजें क्लियर हो जाती हैं. एक तो कार्टोग्राफिक ट्रेडिशंस भी क्लियर हो जाते हैं, और एक चीज और क्लियर हो जाती है कि ये राम लेजेंड किस पीरियड में डेवलप हुई, कब नहीं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अयोध्या का मैप दिया हुआ है, राम जन्मभूमि का उस पर कोई जिक्र ही नहीं. So these are some of the aspects, cultural aspects, जो जिसका रिपोजिटरी जयपुर है. Thank you very much, and I hope कि you will return with us.